I'm Angelo BehindTheVault.net, and with me today is our special guest, Alexandra Cote. She is the head fox at thefoxteam.ca. She's a real estate agent. She's actually been voted Toronto's best real estate agent the last 5 years, top producer in her agency, only the best for Behind the Vault. And Alexandra, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Angelo.
So we're going to jump right in. And, you know, we talk a lot about real estate in our industry, and, you know, when doing financial planning with clients, you know, real estate definitely has a place, you know, whether it's just your home or you have a cottage or a rental, you know, so one of the biggest, I guess, the biggest, the most controversial things we've talked about when it comes to real estate is, you know, your ability to get into the market. So I'll read you a meme. There should be a millennial edition of Monopoly where you just walk around the board paying rent, never able to buy anything. You know, or another one that says, hey, let's play a game of millennial Monopoly. The rules are simple. You start with no money, you can't afford anything, the board is on fire for some reason, and everything's your fault. So I've met plenty of millennials that own property. I have met plenty of Gen X, Gen Y that can't get into the market. So talk a little bit about the stereotype about how millennials can't get into the market, and talk about how that's really not true, and what you do for your clients and you help them get in.
For sure. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of media poking fun of millennials and just how we're so behind in terms of our ability to enter the market and sort of make those bigger life steps than other generations. But it's not my experience. You know, about 70% of my clients are millennials that were first-time buyers. Like in the last 5 years, that is who we're serving. And it's just, it takes some planning and it takes some sacrifice. But even in a market like Toronto, you know, I'm thinking about when I first started, I was doing a lot of leasing, and I was working with a lot of, you know, millennials right out of university that were getting their first salaried positions at, you know, firms or, you know, workplaces, things like that. And they were choosing to have roommates. They were choosing to, even out of university, they're renting the downtown condo, they choose location, but they were sharing with 1 or 2 other people, and they were saving, they're consciously saving, and they had a plan in 5 years to buy. And they were able to do that. You know, they were able to save some of their money by, you know, having a roommate in your 20s. And then, you know, the RSP being a really, really great vehicle for those savings. So as a first-time buyer in Canada, you can put up to $35,000 out of your RSP towards a down payment. And if you're purchasing with another person, they can match it up to 70.
Now that's up, right? Because for a long time it was 25,000.
Yeah, it was 25, right? For a very long time, but I volunteer on the government relations committee with the Toronto Real Estate Board. And so we were lobbying for that change, and the federal government listened to us and upped that limit from 25 to 35. So that has really helped. Yeah, thanks. That's really helped, you know, millennials and first-time buyers in hot markets like Toronto and Vancouver, where, you know, the ladder rung is a little bit higher to get into the market. But other markets which are softer and more quote unquote affordable, like in Fredericton, you know, millennials are living well there if they're employed. So it's really the Toronto and Vancouver markets primarily where there's that frenzy. The media's been focused on them. The media's talking about bubble, talking about bidding wars, and they're always talking about this inevitable crash. And, you know, I have clients that were coming to me and they're hearing their family and they're saying, oh, I shouldn't get into the market because it's going to crash. You know, that is one of the biggest concerns when people come forward, is everyone thinks that everything is overinflated. You know, people's parents can't understand spending $500,000 on 500 square feet. You know, that is just absurd to them. But
because when they were in their 20s and 30s, stuff was like I remember my parents,
they would buy houses for 30 grand. You can buy,
yeah, or 60 grand, right? But that was in the 70s. Like, come on, guys, it's 50 years later or whatever, right?
And it's about how you approach things too. You know, some people have approached these markets as get rich quick schemes or flip schemes, but if you're looking at a long-term investment and you just look at the historical data, like in Toronto, the last 30 years of data show an average of 5% increase year over year. If you average out all the spikes and all the decreases, so the market is always going to come with ups and downs, but once you're in it, your costs are relatively fixed depending on what kind of mortgage you go into. But if you've got a 5-year fixed mortgage, you can ride out a crash and a recovery because you've got the same payments every month and you're still building equity.
And interest rates are so low now. I mean,
there's now
they're
such a good
under
time.
2%. I mean,
I refinanced all my properties. I was like, okay, it's time
no
to
kidding.
go.
You know what? My guy at the bank just called me and he's like, listen, he goes, I can drop your rate down to like 1.6. Done. And listen, I'm not a big fan of the fixed interest rate because statistically, I think the number is like 87% of the time you make more money or you keep more of your money on a variable rate.
Yeah.
Right. But and I remember saying to him, I go, you're offering me a 1.6 fixed rate, which tells me the variable is going to be lower. And he goes, probably. He says, but at the end of the day, it's under 1.5 or it's under 2%. Like, who cares? Right.
Yeah.
It's not like the 80s where it was, 15, 18, 20%. Right. Exactly. So now let me ask you this. Do you think Toronto is still undervalued?
I do. Like it is, it's not, people keep saying, how can things keep getting more expensive? How can things keep getting more expensive? But when you look at other, world-class cities, we're much lower than them. We're much more accessible. Millennials still can buy in Toronto. It's a lot harder to buy in Manhattan as a millennial.
Right. Or Tokyo
or
London.
Or London, and in those cities, like property ownership isn't part of, people's mindset. It's for, unfortunately, like you have to inherit property in some of those cities. Like it's just a lot harder to get into, and you have more renters, it's just more part of the culture. Whereas, the Canadian dream involves home ownership. And it's something that's been really central to all the federal governments that we've had in the last 20 years are really pushing for home ownership and fighting for that dream that they feel is slipping away. So yeah, I mean, now is a great time to get in. I think in 20 years, it's going to be difficult for people out of university to get into a property in 5 years. Like that is, I do think property is going to continue to go up and up, and we're just going to change and evolve into the world-class city that we are.
Right. Well,
right?
You know what? It's like the investment market too, right? People say to me, oh, it goes up, it goes down, I can't stomach it. At the end of the day, it really only matters when you sell, right? So even if you buy a house today at $1 million or 500,000 or whatever, and the market does crash, let's say we go through, God forbid, a fourth wave or something happens and prices tumble. I mean, if your house went from $1 million to 700,000, doesn't mean you're going to panic and sell it. You're just going to be like, whatever, I have my house, I'll make my mortgage payments, and then it'll recover, it'll go back up, and eventually it'll be more than what I paid for. So, the ideology that, there's a bubble, there's a crash, Toronto, Vancouver, these are world-class cities, even Montreal. And it's going to take a special kind of person to be able to afford and to buy in there. But again, Manhattan, Tokyo, London, Paris, New York, LA, Chicago, Miami, it's all the same, right? It's not that different. So, all right, well, let's pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about new builds, because for a long time, people would say, well, I can't afford to get into the market now, but I can afford a new build over the next, 2 years, 3 years, pay for that 20% while I'm maybe living at home with mom and dad. And in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, even if there's some delays, I can move into a condo or a townhouse or a whatever. And that's how I can sort of get started in the market. Now, originally, you buy something for 200,000, 300,000, 400,000. By the time you move in, it's gone up in value. But when we were talking in prep, you're saying that may not be the case anymore. So tell us more about that.
Pre-con gives me anxiety. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it. I think pre-construction in Toronto, 10 years ago, that was the golden age. It did make sense. People, 20% of 300K, 200K is way more attainable for someone to gather than now. You know, studios are selling pre-con in the 600s, you know, for less than 400 square feet. So what changed, you know, is that builders started realizing, you know, the value of land increased, and they are now selling units at the projected value of what they believe they will be when they're finished, right? So if the current market is at $1,000 a square foot, which is pretty common for Toronto right now, you know, the pre-construction condos right now are selling $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a square foot in some cases. So it's a bit of a gamble. You have to be confident that in that when that's ready, it's going to be worth what you paid for it. And in some cases you could be ahead, but a lot of the time you might not be. You might not be, right? You know, $1,400 a square foot is a lot, and there are other cities where that's common, but it's a bit of a gamble. You are giving your money to the builder, right? You're financing their project. And in that time, that 20%, you know, even though the structure can be divided, like oftentimes it'll be, you know, 2,500 on signing, balanced to 5% in 30 days, then the next 5% the year after, then, you know, so you're staggering when you have to put the full 20 down, but you're really stuck in that time. Your options are limited in terms of what you can do. And a lot of people's lives change significantly in a 4 to 5 year span, right? So if you're 21, 22, and you know that someone's told you this is the right thing to do, and you're now putting 20% down on a $600,000 studio, and then it gets delayed because of COVID, and then, you know, the builder is fighting the city and the project gets delayed. So it's actually 6 years out. You know, you're now 28, you might be married. You might, you know, like, do you really want to move into a studio? Whereas, you know, getting into the market as first time buyer now, you only need 5% down. You don't need the full 20. And then as that equity is growing over the next few years, you've got options. You can refinance, you can sell it, you can move out, you can rent it to someone. You're not stuck, and you have more, you know, power and influence over your equity and over your money than it just being in a builder's bank account. And the other thing is that builders have gotten more and more fluent in sort of how much they can get away with. When you walk into a sales center now, you're signing, you know, a document that's 300-400 pages long with all the fine print, and you can be purchasing something with 10-foot ceilings and hardwood floors and all of these finishes, and in the fine print the builder can just change that without your consent, and you can get a product that's much different from what you were promised. You know, you can lose a foot of floor height, you can get this kind of stuff. And they can just cancel the project too. Like that was a couple years ago now, I don't know, pandemic timeline, like a bunch of projects in Vaughan, they just got canceled. And so people had that, they got their money back, but what did it do for them? Nothing. They didn't get any interest on it. They didn't. And now the market is 2.5 years ahead. If they had put that money into resale, you know, you know what product you're getting, because with condos, unless the builder is super reputable and you know, like they're not going to do that, like, you know, Tridel is a super reputable builder, they have a good track record, so you know they're not going to, you know, take 2 feet off your ceiling height and that kind of stuff, and they can finance the projects and stuff like that. So there's a builder in Toronto that's a bit infamous now. They're called Urban Corp. Some people in the industry call them urban crap. They started out doing, you know, detached, semi-detached homes, towns, and then they got into Toronto. They developed most of Liberty Village, and they were a good builder, but they then, you know, got really focused on selling to investors, and they were changing their floor plans from being end user to investor focused. So like fitting as many bedrooms in the least amount of square foot as possible, and those, you know, intending to be rented out. And they just kept cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting and, you know, doing the minimum code. And so their product over time just got worse and worse and worse. And in Ontario, we have something called Tarion. They are the body that oversees new construction in Ontario, and they provide a warranty, or they sort of are the backer of the warranty on new construction. So when you buy something new in Ontario, you have a Tarion warranty. and different, it's up to 7 years on structure, but you warranty to things. So during this project in Toronto, it's called 36 Lisgar. It's just down the street from me. Terrion actually revoked Urban Corp's registration. So their building was no longer insurable because there were just so many offenses on, and they were so expensive to insure because they were producing such bad quality. And that was just such a mess because they then, they were now uninsured. So their product became worthless essentially. And they filed for bankruptcy like in the middle of this building. So this poor building and everyone who's in it is just, there's so many construction liens on it. Everyone is suing them. The value is so depressed compared to everything else. Like the building did eventually get finished and people moved in, but like that is that's a lemon and that's a whole bunch of lemons, right? Like that's the nightmare situation. And it's the exception, not the rule. But when you're putting in pre-construction, like you don't know if the building's going to be well built, how's the management going to be, how's the board going to be, are they budgeting things well? When they are advertising maintenance fees, they always advertise them as low as possible. And now they're taking out more and more things. So your maintenance fee is only 50 cents a square foot, but you're renting your hot water tank, you're paying for water, you're renting your furnace, you're doing all these other things that really make that maintenance fee now much higher than what was advertised. Right. And so people don't always understand the product that they're buying. They don't understand that the product can change and be delayed and that their options for getting out of it are limited. So you can sell your contract, which is called an assignment sale. So prior to the building being finished, you're flipping paper, right? And so you might be 2 years in from when you signed, and maybe there's people believe that it's worth $1,500 a square foot now, right? Like maybe you signed at 1,000, you paid 1,400 for it, and now the market's at 11. So you got to trust that someone else is going to believe that paper is worth as much as you paid for it, maybe a little bit more. But you're paying all these legal fees, and it's just a nightmare. And then once the building is finished, you call that the occupancy stage. So you're physically living in the building, but you don't own it yet. The builder still owns it. And that occupancy stage, ideally is 3 months to 9 months from when you move in. Then the building registers and becomes a condo, and that's when you actually own it. But even when you're living in it, sometimes you don't own it. And that stage, if there's legal issues, if the city is fighting on something, like there's one building that was another 2 years. So it was like 6-7 years before they could actually own it and sell it. And the value, isn't really established until you own it. So it's just, it can still be a good investment for some people, especially if it's something they're adding to an existing portfolio, or, there are good projects, there are things like that, but it's risky. And I think, especially when you're a first-time buyer and your life fluctuates so much in those years, it's better to get into something right away. And then you've got options. I'm like, if you have to sell it in a year for whatever reason, the worst case scenario is you might break even, right? Like you would have been renting that year anyway. You would have gotten a bit of equity. It's going to cover your closing costs. Like you're still ahead. So yeah, sorry, that was a long rant.
No, that's great. Because you know what, with the new build, right? I mean, you made some really great points. Is that, I was thinking of, you get this 22-year-old that's been scrimping and saving and doing the work, putting the work in. Now they're finally in a position where they can be, they can go against the grain and be like, oh, I'm in my 20s and I'm buying. Watch me do this. And it's just problem after problem after problem, right? So, I mean, we've talked on the channel before.
They're paying rent for the 4 years until it's built.
Yeah. And we've talked about on this channel being a landlord and the pros and cons around that, because I could take 10 people that own real estate that they rented out, and 3 people will tell me it's the best thing they've ever done. 3 people will tell me it's a massive nightmare. And the other 4 will be kind of in the middle, neutral about it, right? So, I like where you're saying, yeah, you know what, there are some good builders out there and there are some good opportunities out there, but at the same time, all these other risks involved. I mean, look, it's a 400-page contract. Like, who's going to read that? right?
Well,
I mean,
that's the thing. You should be paying a lawyer too, but a lot of people aren't getting a lawyer.
right,
They'll pay the $1,500 lawyer instead of the $3,000 one, but you need the $3,000 one on something like that. You need to understand what you're getting, and
right,
there's a lot of disappointment and people will go into sales centers and just get sold.
right.
On the dream, on the renderings, on the park, on the this. Like the building I moved into, had the park just got finished last year, and I've been here for 5 years. So I was overlooking a mud pit for 4
Oh, wonderful.
years. It's so
Wonderful.
dusty. Yeah.
And so now as a real estate agent though, like, would you, I mean, I would think, and again, I don't know your industry obviously as well as you do, but I would think that if I'm an agent and I hook into one of these builders, I've got, potentially 200 or 150 or 100 units that I could sell at 3, 4, 5, 600,000 a pop. Like, I could make some serious coin, um, getting involved in something like that. So where does the income opportunity or the revenue opportunity, how does that balance with all the sort of issues that you outlined?
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who specialize in pre-construction, and generally, it makes good Instagram content to be like going to these launches and selling the lifestyle and all this kind of stuff. I think, they're also offering more commission on new construction. So I think, it's
Oh, really?
a shiny, fun thing. Yeah. Sometimes double what we would make on resale, right? So there is some sort of initiative to be pushing that kind of product. My question is, why do they have to pay us twice as much if it's such a good deal?
Right.
So, I mean, my background is in counseling and coaching. I'm a certified professional life coach. And so my goal and my drive in this industry is to help people make, the right decisions, and reach their goals, and sort of, evaluate that along the way. So it's like, you want to buy a house, want to make sure it's the right thing, that you feel emotionally supported, that
Yeah.
what's going on.
It's a major purchase. It's not like you're
Yeah.
buying a Tim Hortons coffee, right? Or a
Right.
Starbucks coffee.
I'm not, I didn't join this industry because I wanted to make a lot of money. That was not my drive. There are opportunities to do that, but it's like a different thing, pre-construction. There's no relationship there, or there's very little relationship there.
Right.
It's a thing. Listen, there are agents that do it and are very successful, and there are people who buy it and are very successful. I just think it's not a first step. It's not the right first step for people to get in the market. I'm not saying all pre-construction is a bad idea. Like, there's definitely good opportunities out there, but you need to be educated. Don't get sold on the dream. Look into the fine print, understand what the builder's powers are in terms of changing the terms of your contract without your consent.
Right. I would say that's a big one.
Yeah.
So I guess that the way you're sort of positioning this, it would sound more like more like an investment opportunity for somebody maybe who's more established, has a house, and has some extra income or extra savings, and says, you know what, I want to diversify my portfolio. So I'm going to go get this new build, and then in 5 years rent it out or flip it and, make 50, 100 grand. If I can do that, that would be great.
Or even parents who are planning for their kids to go to school, and they know, in 4 or 5 years, my kid's going to need a place to live downtown. That could be a good option too, is doing I have a lot of clients who are parents, right? And that they're thinking it's something to diversify their portfolio. The end, they've got an end user for it lined up, which is their kid. And then it makes sense. And the kid lives in it for 4 or 5 years, and they sell it and they flip it.
Right.
It makes
There you
sense.
go.
Paying for a dorm room. Yeah. So those kind of things, but as a first time buyer, no.
Yeah. Okay, great. So now that we've sort of talked about this, with the pandemic, so we're going to shift a little bit. With the pandemic, it's really opened our eyes to a different way of living, doing business. Just our day-to-day is so different, right? I mean, pandemic aside, we would be together in a studio doing this face to face, but because of what's going on, we have to do it on Zoom, right? Hi. So, so far away. Anyways, so the big question I have is, do people need to live in Toronto now to be able to still be close to work? Or because that's the big attraction, right? I mean, demographically speaking, if you're in your 20s, typically you're going to live downtown. It's where the action is. You're single. You know, it's like, hey, I'm gonna, I want to party on a Friday, Saturday night, whatever, right? And then you get into sort of your 30s, and I know I'm generalizing a little bit, but you get into your 30s, maybe you get married, have some kids. You're probably not going to raise a family right downtown Toronto in a big condo where, it's a big party condo, right? You're going to move out to the suburbs. You're going to get the white picket fence in the backyard, and, the street full of, other parents with kids, and the kids can play and whatever, right? So how has the pandemic changed that attitude around absolutely needing to live in Toronto? Like, do your clients still buy in those hotspot areas, or are they kind of looking around going, hey, I could live in Barrie, I could live in Aurelia, I could live in Nova Scotia or Fredericton on the water and still Zoom into my work? What are you finding out there now?
Yeah, there definitely was a big shift when the pandemic hit, and then when it was, here to stay, so to speak. Like, there's a lot of couples who live in a 1-bedroom downtown, 500 square feet, because they went to their offices on Bay Street during the day and they didn't need that much space, and they were saving for a down payment, and now they're both working from home in no space, right? So
Right.
there's a need for space. Like, the biggest hit after the pandemic was, small condos in the core, because everyone was just like out by, rental prices became more affordable for the first time in 5 years. And so people were just moving to having more space, especially if they were renting. It was a lot easier to be like, okay, peace, I'm going to go out to, Prince Edward County for a year and come back when there's something to do here. That being said, like, Shopify came out at the beginning, right, and took that strong stance of, we're going to stay remote. But about a month ago, they quietly leased out some new commercial space in Toronto. Like, even they are planning to have space. I think this year of being apart from people, people are craving that connection. And there's a lot of talk about this hybrid, where there would be an office space and you'd be required to be in the office space maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and the rest can be remote. But at the end of the day, like, people want, people who choose the city are going to want to return to it. There are definitely people who left and went, millennials who left the city and went to the suburbs. And I think they will have some FOMO once things rocking and rolling again, right? Like,
you can rent a house in the suburbs for $2,500 to $3,000 a month.
Yeah.
Right. Which is about, and again, I'm not overly familiar with the rent costs downtown Toronto, but I got to believe it's somewhere in that area.
Totally. Yeah.
Right?
You got 1 bedrooms downtown pre-pandemic were $2,500. So yeah, they made a swap.
Because I had a friend of mine, when she finished university, she lived in Mississauga, and she rented this house, and she lived in the master bedroom. It was a 4-bedroom house with a basement apartment. So her rent was like $2,000 a month. Now we're talking 20 years ago, right? So her rent was $2,000 a month. So what she did is she found like 4 renters to give her $500 a month. She lived rent free, and she's like, don't worry, guys, I'll take care of all the utilities. And that's what she did. So she paid like $200-300 a month for like water and power and all that stuff. And the renters paid her rent, and she had roommates, and she didn't care. She's like, I'm living basically rent free. Right. And it really gave her a chance to save and do that. Right. So now her job was in Mississauga, so she was outside of the city. Right. I don't know how much opportunity you have doing that in Toronto, but all right. So,
there's also the legalities of it, but that's another.
What's that?
I said there's also the legalities of it, but that's another thing totally.
Tell me more. What do you mean?
Well, it sounds like it was a situation where she was subletting, right? Like, so she leased the house from the owner and then was subletting.
Yep.
Like, technically, you're supposed to only do that with the consent of the landlord.
She
I
had the
don't know if
consent of the
she.
landlord. No, she had the
Oh,
consent. Yeah. Landlord didn't
okay.
care.
Then she was
The
running
landlord
an
didn't care.
Airbnb.
Basically, yeah. No,
Yeah,
the landlord was like, listen, if I get my $2,000 a month, I'm happy.
I don't
And if you
care.
want to manage
Okay.
it, however you want to chop it, because the landlord, what he was doing, from my understanding, is he was renting out all the different spots, and it made just more sense to have one person collect all the rent and manage the household. So
Right.
yeah. So, but you're right. There are a lot of leases that don't allow you to sublet without the permission of the landlord. So let's make sure.
Yeah.
Let's make sure.
But no.
Listen, there are a lot of illegal basement apartments too, right? So
Oh,
in
most
every city of the world, right? So
No, I think
okay.
there was a scatter, but I think people are going to come back. I think
So,
3/4 of the people who left are going to come back. Some of them
okay.
won't. Some of them might not need to, but
Depends on their job, right?
depends on the job. Yeah, depends on the job.
All right. So you mentioned that you were on the city's real estate board as a volunteer, but you've also created a subcommittee around climate risk. Now, I think of, I hear climate risk and I think, listen, living in Toronto, I'm okay with global warming, right? Like if we have warmer winters and warmer summers, rock and roll. I mean, I understand the long-term implications, so I'm being a little dramatic when I say it like that. But what do you mean when you talk about climate risk? Because I can't imagine it means temperature and weather.
No. So, climate risk as it pertains to the Toronto real estate market is kind of like two branches. There's one which is knowledge and implementation of high performance homes. So, retrofitting and building homes that are more energy efficient and climate friendly, right? But really the focus of where I've been going is in regards to how climate is going to be impacting value of homes, as well as just physical damage to homes from extreme weather events. So in the Toronto market, the biggest claim on properties is flooding. In the last 3 years, we've had 3 1-in-100-year storms, and the infrastructure of the city just can't handle those types of extreme rain dumps. So there's the overland rain flooding, and then there's the river flooding, so river overflowing. So properties in Toronto are at risk of flood. And then depending on their location, that risk really jumps. When it rains super hard, everyone's basement is at risk if they don't have good grading, if they don't, whatever. But if they're in a floodplain, then it's a whole different story where they've got, 3, 4, 5 feet of water in their basements. And then this is happening not once in 100 years now, it's happening, 3 times in the last 7. So these events are becoming more common, and insurance companies are no longer, they're getting smart to it, right? These claims are huge. And what's happening is sort of, the states, if you look at the states, they kind of have been going through this before us. So a lot of the data that we're pulling is American, because the studies haven't been done here. But when you look at climate change in the state, you've got think of the hurricanes, the wildfires in the states for the last 5 years, and how much destruction there was, right? And how those events are becoming more common. In Ontario, we're looking at water and wind. Fire, obviously Fort Mac, that happened, that was devastating. Right. Fires in BC, but for our market, looking at flooding being the biggest deal. And so a lot of there are 42 neighborhoods in the GTA that have been identified as high risk for flooding based on where they're located in the floodplain and just the infrastructure and how well the infrastructure can handle extreme rain events. And they're at high risk of losing value, because if you look at the states, there are just whole communities that they walk away from, almost overnight, because they lose their insurability. Right. So once a property floods once, okay, it's 1 in 100 years, 2, 3 times. And all of a sudden the insurance companies are going to say, we're not going to insure this area because it continuously floods and we can't afford to be paying out for a new basement, every 2, 3, 4 years. So we're just no longer insuring for water damage. And now, would you buy a property that you can't get home insurance for? Right? And so what happens to the value of those properties? So this is something that is coming. Insurance companies are starting to talk about it. They're taking small steps. I have clients that live in floodplains, and we're always, because a lot of Toronto is at risk. So the mission here is just to start talking about it, to start to putting in place some of the protections that you can. Some pumps and backflow preventers will help a lot. And looking at putting city pressure on the city in terms of improving their infrastructure so that the sewer system can handle, to try and protect the insurability of these homes, and just having that conversation with clients, being like, listen, this home is at risk of losing its value because insurance companies are getting smart to this. And, we just keep having these extreme weather events that are causing damage. So, yeah.
Wow. So as an agent then, like in our industry, we have what's called fiduciary duty, right? So as an agent now, I mean, it's a really dumb question what I'm about to ask, but how much of this do you have to disclose? I would think as an agent, you'd be like, hey, I can show you the house, but it's in a floodplain. You won't get insurance on the basement. So if it floods, you're sort of SOL, right?
So if you need to disclose, but unfortunately very few agents know, and very few homeowners know, because this conversation is just not happening. In Calgary, where they had all that flooding, now it is standard across the board in Calgary, you get a home listing, it comes with a floodplain map, right? So it's disclosed on every single listing, and it's part of the conversation from the get-go. And that's what I'm pushing for to happen in our market. Like, it just needs to be talked about. And so I'm pushing right now in doing education on it, right? Like, at least have people start learning about it and talking about it. Because we're going to get sued, right? Like, if someone goes and buys a house in a floodplain, and then they get up to closing and they go to make their home insurance, and they're saying, sorry, we can't give you insurance on this address. Who are they going to be mad at? The realtor that sold them the property and didn't tell them this is something that they
now, is it just, so help me understand this though, is it just the basement that won't be insured for flooding, or they won't give you insurance on the whole house?
They wouldn't give insurance on flooding, on flooding. Water damage.
So if like the house burns down, or if there's vandalism or whatever, no problem. They'll still insure that. So it's just against flooding. Now, does that also mean like sewer backup?
Yeah, so there's two kinds of water damage. There's like overland, which is, water that comes up from the river rising, or from, that kind of stuff. And then sewer backup, which is pressure on the sewer system, where you get a whole bunch of shit in your basement, right?
Right.
You've got water. Yeah, you've got water coming in from pressure from the sewer, and then you've got overland water. So water that is, because of heavy rainfall, that is like falling from the sky and coming into your home. So you need to first call everyone who's listening to this and owns a home, call your insurance company to make sure you're insured for both, right? Because the overland is not necessarily included as a default. So make sure you have it, add that on your insurance rider. And if you're not insured for it and they won't give you insurance for it, you should sell your house before it loses all its value.
But how in good conscience can I sell my house? I mean, look, in the market, right?
I shouldn't say it's going to lose all its value, right? Because in Toronto, like, the government's going to step in at some point and require that you can get some sort of insurance. Like, it's going to happen, but the next few years are going to be weird transitionally for that.
Right. Yeah. I think, look, with the way the market is right now in the GTA, and we talk about Toronto only because we live here, there's a shortage on supply, right? Like, if I put my house on the market in an hour later, it'll sell for probably, 10, 15, 20% more than what it's worth. So, because there's just not a lot of inventory right now with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Hopefully once, the pandemic is completely behind us, that will start to settle again. But now, I mean, I throw my house on the market, it's gone, right? So as an agent, you want listings that are sellers, because that's a quick, easy boom. Whereas if you got a buyer, you're up against 15, 20, 25
Yeah.
other offers,
And
right?
there's no time to do that kind of due diligence. Like, people are buying homes without house inspections. They're not going to think about the insurability of it, right? But it needs
Right.
to be part of the conversation because it's coming. Like, insurance has also already increased hugely in the last couple of years, especially even condominiums. So there's very few players that will insure condominiums in Ontario, and those rates have gone up significantly because the parking garages flood, right? Like, that's
Right.
hugely expensive too,
And all those cars. Yeah.
all those cars. So yeah, it's the thing that not very many people are talking about. And I think that's going to be the focus of the industry over the next few years. But like, I don't mean to terrify people, like, there
Well,
are programs and subsidies out right now to like help waterproof your home. There are a few that are just like, if you're listening to this and you've been flooded, you probably know you're in a floodplain. Maybe your insurance has dropped you. Like, this has happened to clients of mine who, we bought a property knowing it was flooded, but it was cheaper and they could afford it, and they had a family of 5, and it was like that or live in a terrible school district, and their
right.
property flooded. But like, they didn't call me and yell at me because we had talked about it. We knew, and we had made sure that they had the right insurance coverage, and we made sure, that they knew not to store $1 million things in the basement, and if a rainstorm was coming, they were prepared for it at least.
Like the Picasso, like
Yeah, get
right?
the Picasso off
The
the
Queen's
floor.
crown. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Mr. Simpson. Our insurance company only covers actual things that have got
yeah,
lost in your.
yeah.
Okay. So, top agent in your agency, best agent voted in Toronto the last 5 years, on the city's board, making changes with home buyers plan, talking about climate risk. But you also volunteer at the Parkdale Community Food Drive. And something interesting I read about you is that you donate your commission from one sale a year to the food drive. So
Yeah.
tell me more about that.
Yeah, to the food bank. Yeah, we I started that last year. So I'm we're located in a basement. We're limited by the size and the scope of the space that we have in terms of the services we can provide. And in the last year with the pandemic, like, the need and the pressure on our food bank, double, tripled. And what we needed to do to accommodate our community, setting up deliveries, like all this kind of stuff. So we're really limited by our space. And I feel strongly like I'm contributing to gentrification through my job as, I'm playing Monopoly. I'm a capitalist, right? But it's like helping people get in, but it's also continuing to inflate the market and make home ownership and even renting like a further and further away dream. So I'm aware of the impact on the community and lower income communities that the real estate market is having. And so, yeah, I've been on the board of the food bank since 2018 now. And I love it. I love our community. I love, just the amazing like volunteers that come out. And so we're really trying to get a new space. And so I thought that, once a year I could donate my commission from a sale to go towards that fund. Of getting us hopefully a more permanent home in Parkdale. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, we're working on it right now. So the first official Parkdale house with Heart is in flux. I'm hoping we'll have an announcement in a couple months. And then I'm looking forward to doing it again next year.
Well, you know what? We will link the information on the Parkdale Food Bank. If anybody wants to get involved, or if anybody wants to donate, or anybody wants to just help the cause a little bit. I'm sure you'll take cash. I'm sure you'll take food. I'm sure you'll take a helping hand, right?
Hugs. Yeah.
So cool. All right. Well, listen, I like to wrap up with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
This has been a fantastic podcast. I've personally learned so much. And I got to tell you, as a financial consultant, I also coach other advisors and business owners. Nice. And to see what you've accomplished in such a short time at a young age is motivating. You know, it's easy for people just to paint everyone with the same brush and go, you millennials are lazy. Oh, you don't like to work. Oh, you're spoiled. But it's not true. It really, you know, seeing what you've done is fantastic, and you know, keep it up, and I hope you continue not only to be successful in your work, but successful in the projects that you're passionate about. And it's been an absolute pleasure. So let's
Thanks,
start.
Angelo.
Let's start with the first question. What's the dumbest thing you've ever spent money on?
Oh my gosh, I have to answer this quickly. The dumbest thing. I was gonna say my hair, but
Okay. What's one piece of advice you'd give your 20-year-old self?
you are cool. Just be yourself. Stop trying so hard.
Awesome. What's one experience that you'll cherish forever that cost you a pretty penny to experience?
Ooh, I went to Italy with my mom for her 70th birthday, and it was
Nice.
a really nice trip. Yeah.
Awesome. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Mint chocolate chip.
That's my grandmother and my eldest son's favorite. Good on you there. Where's the first place you'll travel to once COVID's behind us?
Hawaii.
Hawaii. Awesome. What's the website?
Oh, thefoxteam.ca.
Awesome. How do I book a consultation with you or one of your foxes?
You can reach out at alex@thefoxteam.ca, or call or text me or DM me or find me on social media. You can reach out any other way. You can
Awesome.
yodel, just yodel Morse code.
I'm gonna try that. We'll see if it works.
Okay.
Couple more. Will you come back and do this again sometime?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And finally, what does the fox say?
It says invest in real estate and
Awesome.
in yourself.
This is Alexandra Cote, top agent in Toronto. I'm Angelo Mancios, and you've been Behind the Vault.
Well, thanks so much for watching. It's been a pleasure being on Behind the Vault. You can find all of the links below. You can follow me on Instagram at Alexandra Cote and at thefoxteam.ca. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Behind the Vault.